When it goes yellow. Hello and welcome to Answer Engine Optimization, the future of SEO, the third episode all about AEO strategy. Today we've got David Bain, Rebecca Sentance, and Kimberly. I'm afraid I couldn't remember your surname off the top of my head because it was supposed to be Mary Haynes. She couldn't make it. It's really unfortunate. But Kim stepped in at the last minute. We're really pleased to have her on board. So we're going to start with questions to Kim. I know you have a horse and you've already fed him, so he's not going to be too impatient while we're having the webinar go on. Was he happy to be fed early today?
Yes, he was.
He was happy to be fed, ready for a ride, but it's going to have to be later on. We'll have to wait for that. Now, on a more professional level, I noticed that you're really keen on relevancy in search queries, and that's perfect for this because I had two pillars for my strategy. I just added the third, which was relevancy. So you step in at exactly the right moment. Is that correct? You're the queen of relevancy, could we say?
Well, I don't know if I'm the queen of anything, but yeah, relevancy to who you are writing for and targeting, which, believe it or not, is something that most people forget.
Yeah, another thing that you're a super expert in is UX design and usability. That's something else people forget, if I'm not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you specialize in things that people forget about.
Pretty much. That's why I do site audits. It's my job to find out, okay, you forgot this. But it doesn't matter who the company is or big or small, there's always something that I'm going to find that they didn't think about.
Right, I think that's really good because once again, they are things that people don't think about enough. And one of the questions that you're going to be having is all about relevancy. So I'm looking forward to that. Now on to Rebecca, who I've known for about 6 months now, a journalist with Search Engine Watch originally. You wrote an article about AEO following a webinar that we did. I also noticed, in fact, you were writing a lot of articles about voice search and AEO around that time. Is that right?
Yeah. And I'm now with eConsultancy, so I'm the deputy editor there. And I recently wrote a series about the state of voice search in 2018 and beyond, and did some predictions about the future of voice search. So it's one of my big interest areas: voice search, the future of search, all of that good stuff.
So you've come to the right place then. Wonderful. That's amazing.
I hope so.
I also noticed something in your biography that you did open knowledge.
That's true. You've been raiding my LinkedIn.
I have, but I thought that was kind of interesting. That's where you started, checking out company data sets.
Yeah, well, I guess it wasn't a full-time thing. It was literally just a one-off that I did. But I dabbled in sort of open data sets. I helped out with these events called flash hacks, which are about liberating company data sets. So I guess that was more of a side thing, really. But yeah, I've done some work with open data and then journalism. I haven't managed to combine the two yet.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, what struck me was you know how these data sets work, but also it brought home to me the fact that there's, I think somebody said 150,000 Google employees checking all this data they're sticking in the knowledge graph. And there were a lot of people around the world who were doing the human checking of the data that Google is correcting. You started off there, obviously you're not one of the 150,000, now you're a journalist with the absolute perfect surname. I'm sure everyone says that.
Yeah, that was sort of a weird quirk of fate. People sometimes don't believe me that I'm really a writer with the surname Sentence, but I promise it's my real name.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering also if it was everybody in the family was a journalist, but that might be pushing it too far.
No, my dad has done some writing. He's an economist, but he's written for newspapers. But I'm the main writer in the family. Great
stuff. Thank you. Now on to David. We had a little chat the other day. I know you like the south of France.
Hey, Jason. Yeah, good to be on here with you. Yeah, absolutely. I love travel full stop, I guess. It's great to explore new places, yeah.
Super, and you've got a podcast, and so usually you're the one asking the questions, and today you're... I
do, that's a little bit strange. I've been on a few shows as guests, but I've certainly hosted many more shows than I've been guests on. I think I've interviewed about 500 different people before, which is getting ridiculous.
Crumbs, that is an awful lot. I'm incredibly impressed. Now I want to know if we can turn that round and get you to answer questions as well as you ask. And I think Voltaire said, don't judge a man by his answers, judge him by the questions he asks.
Right, okay, and how do you judge me by my questions?
I think your questions are amazing. I think Voltaire would be terribly impressed with your SEO knowledge. So we've got David, we've got Rebecca, and we've got Kim, and I'd like to thank you all very much for turning up, especially Kim, who came in at the very last minute. We've got really interesting questions lined up. You all pretty know what's going to go on, but it's AEO strategy, and we're going to start with Kim first. We've got the killer question, which is, can we combine an AEO strategy with existing AEO tactics? Kim.
Okay. Yes, we can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yes, we can, and we should be. And so the first thing that I do is consider user intent when we're writing content or optimizing any content. And to work that in, we need to decide who we're targeting, why we're targeting, and what we have that we want people to find on the internet. I noticed that in one of your things you said that we're here to solve problems, because we usually ask for, how do I do this? But we also do a lot more things, like and I'll give you an example. We had to replace something in a motorhome, a steering column. It took probably 50 to 100 searches to figure out the right model, how to do it. And we ended up using YouTube for the ultimate answers. Somebody had to optimize a YouTube video for us to get the right answer. And so there are a lot of other ways to supply information and answers to queries, and also applications, which is something that Eric was talking about. So I begin with a user persona. And talking to people and saying, and SEOs will do user personas, but they're kind of limited to, they kind of still emphasize keywords. I'm looking above or, past that, delving into who this person really is, what's happening in their life, where are they searching from, what device are they using when they're asking for information. So it can get pretty in depth. But, it starts with, I use empathy for the searcher. Okay,
so what we're looking there at basically saying your approach is very much empathy with the searcher. It's a philosophical approach whereby we optimize for the people we're actually aiming to reach out to, in which case what we were doing before is the same as we're doing now, except we have more devices, more platforms, and as you said, YouTube, more channels in which to pull people in. I think that's a great answer. I don't think any SEO tactics that we used before in the recent past that weren't black or grey hat have gone out the window. I think you can maintain your SEO tactics and integrate them into your AEO strategy. Thank you, Kim.
Oh, can I add one more thing?
Yes, you may.
Accessibility too,
oh.
Which is definitely missed, and that's going to be the future for voice. Okay,
in fact, in 2 episodes' time, not the next one, but one after, we're going to be talking about accessibility. We've got Simon Cox, who's already said that he thinks that's the big underused part of SEO, which is wonderful. Right, so we're on to the strategy, which is my oversimplified view of looking at the strategy for AEO. It's 3 pillars. It used to be 2, understanding and credibility. And recently, I came up with a 3rd, which was relevancy, which is why I'm so happy Kim is here. We have 3 pillars. We start off, with the idea we need to answer a question. Google needs to understand what the options are, and then we need to convince Google that we're the best answer. So we have a question of relevancy. Are we relevant for the question? Number 2 is communicate that we have the answer and communicate our answer to Google in a format that it will understand. And interestingly, that it can present on the device or on the channel. And then we need to convince it that we're the best solution out of the solutions it has found which are relevant. So, first question is user intent from Google's point of view. What is the user intent of the question or the query? And from our point of view, how can we be sure that we are relevant or we are aiming at relevant queries? So, During the next few episodes, the next few seasons, we'll look at this from the point of machine learning, leveraging the knowledge graph, and from brand positioning. So we'll leave that to one side for the moment, and we'll look straight back, I'm afraid, straight back to Kim. Sorry, not afraid, I'm very happy with straight back to Kim, but it means she gets to speak twice in a row. You said, Kim, Google's algorithms look for signals for relevance. Can you expand on that, please?
Oh, geez, yes. Google watches everything that we say and do, where we do it, what device we're using. And I think a lot of people don't even understand how much Google knows what we're doing. Signals for relevance with Google are trust, credibility, citations. And there's other places where people put information as well, like Google Scholar. And there's also different ways that, or different categories of information that people search for. I was just reading a study on new moms, and the information that they're looking for is how do I do? Where do I do such and such? And they are a specific user persona to optimize for, but they're also kind of comparing notes and who has the most credible information. So you really need to build up your credibility over time. The trust and credibility are ancient. They go back to the 90s. There's actually a set of usability heuristics that we use for credibility alone, that if you just do them and on your website, you're already rocking it. But people forget that. So dates, keeping everything current, working on your profile, packing your information with the Google snippets, every little thing that you can do, and then you branch out. Instagram. My daughter said, "Mom, people don't know you." And I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." Well, yeah, they don't know me on Instagram. Mm-hmm. So, but Google's looking. All of these are signals. And okay. So.
Yeah, no, great. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just kind of amassing all that in my mind and thinking what really comes out of that is, number one, Google's got a phenomenal amount of signals, and we don't really realize, or we don't perhaps appreciate how many signals it has. And the other is that it's watching everything, and every single little detail helps. I think somebody from the English Olympic bicycle team said that we've all got the same equipment. What makes all the difference in the same training? What makes the difference is the tiny details that we get better than the others.
Right, and who's sharing what? And, you know, who sharing is huge, and Google's watching that as well. Okay,
so lots of social media, lots of personas. Great stuff. That was wonderful, wonderful answer. Now we're going straight through to another question. This time it's David. I saw that you wrote a series of books that I've seen on Amazon. Keywords are no longer the key was one of them, or something along those lines. What do you think? How can you expand on that?
I mean, first of all, I love the two words that Kim started with, empathy and accessibility. Well, when I was having a think about what this direction this discussion would take, I was thinking about context and usability, and you can always almost say that those are the brothers and sisters of empathy and accessibility. But I mean, with regards to keywords, I would say that you still need keywords to be considered, but you don't need keywords to be selected. So what do I mean by that? I would say that you need traditional SEO to be considered to get to the top page of Google. As long as if you're on the first page, then you would generally be considered for answer engine optimization. So I think keywords are really helpful to establish yourself, your site's area of focus to begin with. I would still want to include a keyword in the heading, somewhere in the content, possibly in the meta description. But I think it's fair to say that keywords in links are no longer key. Answer engines are still looking for keywords, but they also require context and authority, really. So if, you know, as an SEO, you really want to be involved in your whole content publishing strategy and not just thinking about the technical side of SEO. I think if you're a big business, you work for big clients, yeah, personas are absolutely key. You know, what Kim was talking about then as well. You need to get a grip of precisely who your target audience is, and write in the tone, the context of their particular situations. I think that if you're an individual, if you have your own brand, then perhaps your coach, your consultant, personal brand, you're probably writing to satisfy your own interests and needs. So your requirement of having a persona that you talk to that isn't necessarily related to yourself personally isn't a consultant's thing, and if you're a coach or consultant, possibly not. But yeah, in summary, in relation to keywords, I would say keywords are still a key, but only to one of the doors, and there are many more doors than there used to be.
Okay, great. So, I mean, I really like how you put all that. Keywords, obviously, we need them, or they're interesting in order to get to that first page. Once you're on the first page, they don't necessarily matter. One thing I do try and push home with my clients, at least, is that what I've typed into the search box, or what I've said, especially typed in the search box, it's helpful to me as a user if I see it on the page when I get there to reassure me that I'm actually on the right page. But within the context of AEO, as you said, the context of what you're writing, the site, the content that you're creating in a more global sense is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think it's likely to help. And obviously, you know, a single mention gives a search engine greater confidence that that's what the page is about. But similar ways as there on the website is there on the web, then there's that confidence there already for search engines. So it certainly becomes a lesser need to stuff your page. You shouldn't be stuffing your page, certainly.
No, not anymore. So we're moving on. We've looked at relevancy. We looked at keywords. What really comes out for me from that is that relevancy is the basis for all this. Make sure you're relevant. And then you need to make sure that you're understood. You need to communicate. And what I think a lot of site owners forget is, and marketers indeed, is that you need to actively communicate. You can't just expect Google to come and understand you. It's obviously very smart. It's obviously got machine learning. It's got its knowledge graph. It's got enormous resources at its disposal. But the more you communicate, the more you make it easy for it, the better you will perform. So we'll be looking at structured data in the next season. Then we'll be looking at the knowledge graph, and we'll also be looking at brand position later on in the series in the context of getting Google to understand your answers. For today, we're going to come back to David. I read recently from Bill Slawski that Google may use reviews to learn about entity attributes. I thought that was phenomenally interesting. The idea that Google looks at reviews and can get information about the company or its products through what people write. What do you think? We've lost you, David.
I know I didn't unmute myself. Apologies about that.
No problem.
So what I was briefly saying was that Google will obviously crawl many things on the web to try and find out more about you as an entity. And what it will do in relation to reviews is it will look to build a greater level of trust about you, about your brand, about the context, about the sentiment, about the authority of different reviews out there. That will tend to happen, I would think, if Google sees a certain number of reviews. It's unlikely just to take one or two as having enough authority to form a definitive opinion about you as a brand. But if, for instance, someone was describing a business online and the last 3 reviews used the word closed, then that's maybe a bit of a clue to Google that perhaps that business may not actually be operating anymore. And maybe it should reduce the level of trust that it has for the Google My Business listing. Google obviously looks at patterns online. And it's not just in reviews. I had a look. I did a bit of a study recently into videos on YouTube, and I was looking at the phrase "how to tie a tie," and there were a couple of different videos in there. There was one that had about 19 million views, and the one had about 900,000 views, and both had been on YouTube for roughly the same period of time. One was ranking number 1, one was ranking 3. So it gives you an indication as to, if you rank highly, how much more traffic you can actually get rather than slightly further down. But the reason I'm sharing this with you is that if you have a look in the comments underneath the videos, the issues that people had with the third place video was that people continually use the word mirroring and having an issue with the fact that the tying of the tie was mirrored, and also they had a bit of an issue with the fact that it was too fast. So as an individual, you can go and look at reviews and to see if there's anything that's repeating as a potential negative issue about your business or someone else's business, and it gives you an opportunity to probably see things from a search engine's eyes as well, and to try and rectify the situation. And obviously just focusing in on reviews, you've got an opportunity as a business to do things like identifying the top 2 or 3 review sites out there and funneling your satisfied customers towards them, hoping that they will skew things slightly more positively in your direction.
Yeah, so reviews are incredibly powerful, especially positive reviews, to indicate to Google that you're trustworthy, that you're a good source of information. And also the patent, I think that Bill was talking about, was mentioning that things that you say or people say in reviews also give it clues to something, to attributes of the entity. For example, if everyone's saying the toilets were awful in the restaurant, Google knows there's a toilet, even if it was awful. So it's adding information to Google. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, sorry. I thought you were
absolutely. It's adding context, isn't it? And Google obviously have issues with. I think in the previous episode you had, I was listening to Don and Joe, and so obviously Eric is part of that as well. Great episode. Anyone that hasn't watched that yet should go back and listen to or watch episode 2. But they were talking about the challenges that search engines sometimes have with referring to he's and the theys and who specifically they were actually referring to. So search engines aren't infallible, and it's important to try and make things as simple for them as possible with regards to context and what people are saying. But if there's that repetition in there, it makes it easier for search engines to trust things that it's likely.
Sure, yeah, I mean, they're not infallible, and they need help, and the more you can spoon feed them, the better. We're going to look at that in the next season with structured data. There's loads of really interesting questions that we're going to come up with now. Now we're going to move over to Rebecca, being the writer person, the journalist amongst us. Mobile and voice both tend towards short form, clear, simple content. That was something Dawn said in the last episode. Something that Mark Twain said that I really love is, if I'd had more time, I would have written less. Is short content the way forward? Would Mark Twain have been happy?
Well, I was unmuting. So I would say there's a bit of a contradiction inherent in the industry currently, where on the one hand, we're pushing for long-form, high-quality content to cater to Google's algorithm, and on the other, we're promoting these short, succinct answers for mobile and voice. But the first thing that I would say is that no advice is absolute. I mean, when you're creating content, you want to create the content that satisfies the purpose that you're creating it for, regardless of what you might have read about, what's going to do best on mobile or voice, because at the end of the day, it's what's going to do best is what works for your brand and what the people that visit your website are looking for. So if I had to give 2 pieces of advice for people looking to create content for mobile and voice, first of all, I would say create the content that serves the purpose that it needs to, regardless of length. If you're writing a how-to guide, then make sure it covers all the points in enough detail. If you're writing a blog post, make sure it gives a full treatment of the subject matter. Don't feel that you need to cut it short because you're worried about its reception on voice or mobile. Because the second piece of advice I would give is use mobile, carry out searches on mobile and voice, and find out how your content ranks and how it's presented. And then you will know exactly how it's being received by these audiences. And if you have a good responsive mobile site, then regardless of whether your content is in-depth or short and concise, it will be presented well. So that's more important, is the presentation and the design. When it comes to voice, find out how voice assistants are presenting your content, listen to the excerpts that are being presented. And in the last episode, Eric Enge mentioned, I think, a new type of schema markup, which is possibly being introduced that can help you mark up the bits of your content you want voice assistants to read out. So you can help guide that as well. But it's important just to know what it is about your site that's being presented to these audiences, and then you can work on presenting it in the best way possible. What I would say also is that you shouldn't confuse short form content with readable content. Readability is when you have content that's written clearly with straightforward terminology, simple language, and it's easy to understand by all sorts of different audiences. And that kind of content is great for accessibility, like Kim mentioned, and SEO. So by all means, write readable content. Google's official guidelines for voice make sure that your excerpts are clear, concise, and grammatical. But that doesn't mean it has to be short form at all.
Yeah, great answer. I really love the idea there that we're looking at don't necessarily write short, don't necessarily write long. You have to look at the context in which the question is being asked, and also the context of the device and the format that answer will be given. And the idea that we should always write long or always write short is, as you said, no advice is absolute. That's definitely quotable.
Maybe Mark Twain wouldn't approve, but when it comes to search engine optimization, that's how it works.
You just ruined my quote. Oh well.
I'm so sorry.
It's all right. It's my favourite quote in the whole world. And one other thing I would add that I think we'll be dealing with later on is that if you have long form content and you have multiple answers in there, simply using headings and anchor links at the top and sections within an article in Semantic HTML5, you can actually provide multiple answers within one page and have a full page that answers a lot of questions and yet appear for each one of those answers.
Sure.
Perhaps not very successfully right now, but I think that's definitely coming. Thank you, Rebecca. So we're on to the next part, which is once Google has figured out what it is the user, the intent of the user, what the user really wants, is really looking for, and it's figured out what the available answers are by understanding what we've communicated. If we're a successful marketer, we will have communicated to Google what it is we're offering. It then needs to rank. It needs to choose which is the best one to offer. So it's looking at credibility, and we need to convince. Now, previously in the old school SEO, we were looking very much at links. Links are this kind of idea of votes, obviously. Now it's much more complex. There are many, many more signals, as Kim said earlier on. There are a phenomenal number of signals that Google can rely on to decide if somebody's credible. And David was talking about reviews earlier on. They've become incredibly important. The whole idea that my company is credible and my answer is credible, or the most credible, and it's up to me to convince Google of that. It's not for me to sit back and expect Google to understand it on its own. Obviously, that's a great deal about brand credibility signals, which is going to be the last season of this series. But it's also the knowledge graph, which is either in 2 seasons' time. So we're going to concentrate on a couple of other things right now. Links. David, I know you know quite a lot about links. I read once, or I saw Gary just say that short head requires links, long tail does not. He seems to be implying for at least long tail keywords, links are pretty much redundant now. Do you really think that? To what extent are they becoming redundant?
Look, obviously, links are still important for search engines. I love the way that Rebecca actually started off the previous section by saying no advice is absolute. Obviously, we're having a discussion here, not from within knowing exactly what's going on in Google's algorithm. There's a very close-knit community that perhaps know a bit of that, but even now with so much AI going on, there's a lot of people that think they know that don't necessarily know. But anyway, our experience is obviously based upon being involved in the world of SEO for quite a while. I would say that the thing to ask is how would a well-structured site really go about obtaining links, and if you can research what great players are doing, what websites with good practice and producing great content, how their links are evolving, then that's likely to be a good strategy to follow. If you're linked to from your homepage from some prominent directories, things like Google Maps and perhaps a few certain industry directories, then that would be a good thing to do for your homepage. But a good site also publishes content that's good and content that's popular, and good popular content tends to result in good links. So what does a link really mean to Google? Well, to me, links are a strong signal to Google that says, consider me. And the degree of consideration is based on the authority and relevance of the linking site. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you have a content publishing strategy, which means that you generate maybe 10 fresh links to a piece of content in a couple of days after you hit publish, that's a strong signal to Google that it should consider that page to be ranked for highly relevant phrases. So what Google then does, in my opinion, is that it decides to test. So it raises your ranking from maybe 30 to 3 in a few hours to get a feel for how people interact with your content compared with other content that was already ranking highly. And then if it finds out that people prefer your content, so if you get a higher click-through rate, if people stay on your site for longer, or they don't come back to the SERP seeking another answer, then the question is, how do you retain your rankings? And that probably revolves back to UX and just ensuring that your site is a great experience, wonderfully fast loading, and probably more traditional areas of SEO really as well. But to summarize, to what extent are links becoming redundant? They're not redundant. I think they're just becoming an initial signal rather than an overarching ranking factor.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I hear from you, David, because you've done the links and the keywords questions, is that to get into the consideration, or to become part of what Google will consider to be the answer it will suggest or be on the top page, you need to rely on these traditional SEO tactics, which are keywords, or these traditional SEO ideas, which are keywords and links. But once you're there, you need to convince it, and you need to look at the relevancy from a very different point of view, which is, in this case, UX. Looking at user experience, and Google's picking up.
Exactly. I mean, keywords, links, they're both, in my opinion, very strong signals to Google. Look, you should consider this. Okay, Google will consider it. They'll test it a little bit. But if they find out they're not getting enough clicks through to the page, or if users just aren't appreciating the bit of content, you're not going to get ranked for that piece of content, even if you've got loads of great links, because the UX signals are too strong.
But in fact, we come right back to the first question that I asked Kim, which is, can you integrate your SEO tactics, your SEO strategy into an AEO strategy? And the answer is, you should build your AEO strategy on top of your SEO strategy. Would that be fair?
Yeah, could I add or interject something there? Along those lines, we want readers, users respond to ethical content and content by writers that they respect. And so I just wanted to point that out, especially when you're competing with other competitors. And somebody's asking a question about Amazon, and immediately I'm thinking, we're all competing with Amazon. But if you can communicate and persuade people that you are the more ethical product developer, you have more respect, and all the different ways that I can write about that you can do that. But that's plays into this as well.
Yeah, sure. Great stuff. So whoever you're competing with, you can actually win as long as you're ethical, as long as you please people, and the UX is great, and the people are convinced that your product is actually what they would prefer to buy. I think there is a certain reaction within the public as well, that Amazon, they kind of think, oh, not Amazon again, which is perhaps to their disadvantage. I don't think it bothers them enormous amount, but certainly it's something we can play on as a small-time marketers faced with the beast that is Amazon.
That takes us back into the brand conversation, Jason. And obviously, if someone sees the Amazon brand in the SERP, they're more likely to click on that result rather than actually another domain name that they haven't heard of before. And that's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of, they'll get higher click-through rate. Google will think that's the most relevant result for that particular phrase.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was a punk back in the day, so I see Amazon and I click on something else. But I think I'm in the minority, and I think you're right, and I'm being foolish and naive again. But yeah, great point. So we're back to Rebecca again for the credibility signals. This is something you wrote in your Search Engine Watch article after listening to the webinar that she, Lo, and I did for Trustpilot. Now, we didn't say the word credibility signals at any point, so you invented it. Can you tell us what you mean?
Well, I was a bit surprised when you first told me that I'd managed to coin a term, because I wasn't aware of doing that at all. I was just trying to give a name to something that seemed to fit what I was describing. But basically, as you said, I did a write-up about what is answer engine optimization, how does it work, based on this webinar that you did with Chilo. And I was trying to build on the techniques that you explained in the webinar, in which both of you emphasized the importance of communication and credibility to AEO. So communicating to Google or to an equivalent answer engine what your business is about, and proving that your answers come from a credible source. So obviously, credibility signals is a term that I made up. As you said, it's not an official Google term, as I don't work for Google. But if I had to give a definition to, what was I trying to get at with this term, I would say credibility signals are things like links, positive mentions, whether linked or linkless, because, linkless mentions where someone references your business, but they might not link back to you, still count in today's SEO world. Third-party reviews and having a presence in a trusted database like Wikidata or Crunchbase. All of these things send an extra signal to Google that your content is a trustworthy source. So every action that you can take to confirm that your business is credible, that it has a consistent, factually correct presence across the internet, sends an extra signal to Google that you're credible, and weights the information from it that much more heavily when it comes to an answer engine trying to decide what content, what source to draw the answer from. And so that's what I would say credibility signals are. The more of these signals that you have, the more credible you come across as.
Brilliant. Wonderfully put. I thought that was incredibly clear. I'm thinking about this transcript now. The transcript there is going to be absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Well, I'm a writer, so.
Oh, good point. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. So, of course, you are going to give the wonderfully clear and concise answer that's easy to transcript. Okay, back to Kim. This is something I was really interested in. This is something I wanted to ask Marie, but unfortunately she couldn't be here. But Kim stepped in, and she knows lots about this too. Author EAT, company EAT, is it purely quality control, or is there a ranking factor in there?
I forgot about this question.
Well, I mean, from what I understood from what Marie was saying is you need to really build up your expertise, authority, and trust, both for authors who are writing for you or writing your content, but also for your company, and that it's an integral part of the Google quality guidelines. Now, obviously, Google quality guidelines is 150,000 Google employees checking that the results are good. And that's what Marie was talking about. But then you kind of think, well, if we look at what Rebecca just said about credibility signals, the two match up actually quite nicely in many, many ways. I'm wondering if you feel that EAT may well actually now be a ranking factor.
Well, yeah, and also the performance of the website is huge. I mean, Google has just exploded with the mobile and the performance of how fast your pages load. And apps are huge, and Eric kept talking about that and the future. He was on the money with that last webinar that you did. But QA is something that I do in every audit, but I look at it from the user perspective, and we are trying to persuade the user to trust us, to believe us, to use our brand and our product. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And just one example that was mentioned in another webinar is the use of facts. I have to tell you, in usability land, a fact is a big no-no. If there is a fact on a website, that signals us that you didn't know where to put the content. So what you do is you answer the question within your landing pages, your home page, and your blog content, product pages. You can even put it in your product description. But these are all quality things that we look for when we perform an audit. And Google notices this is like the extra effort that you're doing.
Okay, so I mean, EAT actually also comes down to users as well. If it's usable and if the users are convinced, then we're doing an awful lot better straight away. Google's looking at these EAT signals, and whether it's a ranking factor or not doesn't actually matter at the end of the day, because if we do improve that, we do improve Google's vision of us or view of us, and we also improve our users' view of us, and helps us push forwards in terms of the results. I'll have a think about your comment about FAQ, because I've got clients who've got those, so they've been naughty.
Yep. Oh, it's something that comes up a lot.
Well, I'll ask you some for advice on that. So, evolving strategies. Over the last year, obviously, the SEO landscape has changed significantly. My question here, and it's one to each of you, perhaps we'll start with David. How has your approach to strategy evolved in the last year?
Okay, so I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but I mean, I've been focusing on producing a lot of digital marketing courses and hosting search marketing podcasts over the last year or so. So I've not been doing a lot of active SEO, but I have had the opportunity to see a lot of what's going on and interview a lot of people about what's going on as well. And obviously, there's an opportunity to appear for answer boxes, which is going to feed into this opportunity that we're talking about here. For me, AEO is really based upon two things: understanding and credibility, but also probably timeliness. So possibly I would throw timeliness into the ring. The reason I'm saying that is on Search Marketing Scoop a couple of episodes ago, I was discussing this with Mike Alton. And he was giving an example of a blog post that he published, which was about what happened with Vine. And he's driven tens of thousands of visits to his site through that one post. And he's a appears in answer box and #1 listing for certain fairly highly searched keyword phrases. But he managed to do that, I think, largely because he knew what was going on in the industry and he published at exactly the right time. And I think that has to be a keen part of the mix here. It's not necessarily about researching what people have searched for historically. It's being aware of what is likely to happen as a news story in your industry over the coming few months, and being on top of things before it happens, so you can perhaps grab the keyword phrase before it becomes used by the majority of people, and that will give you another significant chance of being that #1 slot.
Super, great stuff. Kim, how has your AEO approach to strategy evolved over the last year? For me, it's the year that AEO became a thing.
Oh, accessibility is #1. And the reason being is it's all about inclusion. And we have just spent, the first 20 years really focused on a narrow user group. And by opening it up to accessibility, you're including so many more people, which begins by understanding what accessibility is. I need accessibility for my eyes. I'm not blind, but it's emotional, it's mental, it's so many things. It's like a temporary hand injury. There's so many things that we can do. And accessibility is text to voice software, and that's going to be huge. The other thing is removing barriers, and people can't stand that, but a barrier is like an ad or a slider or a big hero image that shrinks to nothing on mobile. When we produce content, we're also putting up walls and barriers and hurdles and things like that, preventing people from even getting to the content. So okay, Google's going to go, ugh, we're leaving. Those big, sign up for our newsletter before you can read our content, that's a barrier. why would you put content up and then prevent people from seeing it or make them, perform a task before, it's just logic. So
Yeah.
I guess my answer is just common sense.
Common sense, a great quote. I agree with you about the newsletters. That quite annoys me. But what I take away from there is your definition of accessibility, which I really like, because for me, accessibility is all the alt tags and the rest of it. It's also, as you rightly say, eyes, ears, mouth, and also one's capacity to understand what's being communicated to us. So no point in talking over people's heads. Great answer. Love that one. Now, Rebecca, you've got the last shot at this question. How has your view of AEO strategy changed in a year?
Well, I come at it mostly from a theoretical angle, first of all, because I write and analyze SEO and AEO more than I do. But you said that this year is the year that AEO became a thing. And I'd say that's true for me, because if you go back to this time last year, I didn't know what AEO was. So in fact, over the last year, I've come to understand what answer engine optimization is and how it works. But also, I think I've got an appreciation of the extent to which search and answer engine strategies are becoming much more fluid and nuanced, even more so than they were before. So if you think about something like the rise of linkless mentions, which I think I referenced earlier, this isn't just, a straight link building. It isn't the number of links that point to your site. It's not mechanical. So we've moved away, though, as David said, links are still important, but we're moving away from the mechanical link building much more towards a nuanced sort of subjective. It's about the quality of how your business is referenced, where it's referenced, who it's referenced by, and that's all a lot more nuanced and a lot harder to track, but also a lot harder to game the system when it comes to, if you're trying to manipulate that. So that's how my approach to AEO has evolved. It's an appreciation of how this is.
Yeah, super. I mean, what I take from what you just said is in fact, we've moved away from pure link building and more back, in fact, towards more traditional press relations.
Yeah, I've read a lot about the role of PR in digital marketing, and indeed, a lot of people have said that PR is by no means on its way out. If anything, it's on its way back in, and that's really interesting when you think about how PR would interact with SEO. You wouldn't think the two have a relationship, but in fact, I think there's a big overlap.
Dan, I thought that was my super original super theory, and it's actually, you've read about it a lot. You're ruining a lot of my theories today, but I love you really for it because it puts me right back in my place. Thank you.
No, I think it's a very good observation.
But it's been made a lot of times. Okay, but final little furlong here. A little bonus on position 0, because we had a couple of good quotes last time from Eric and Dawn. Eric is saying that Google is about building an algorithm on top of the normal search algorithm that would specialize in finding that best one of the canonical short answer to a user's question. And Dawn said that they go to the knowledge graph first, pull everything out of that, and then they fill in the gaps from the web page. I was wondering if you've got anything to add to that position 0 discussion that they started last time. David?
I would say that Google want to build a UST, not a USP, a UST, an ultimate source as a source of truth. So if you're trying to rank for a query that Google already have a UST for, forget it and move on to building an answer box for a query that isn't being fulfilled correctly. There's lots of queries that people ask at the moment where you see the results and it's just not the right context. It's not the right answer. And if you do your job correctly, then yes, you can be that position 0 for that query. But what's the point in attempting to be there for a direct answer that already exists, certainly, as well? I'd also say that Don called it assistive engine optimization, and I'd second that. I also believe that Google software, because Google software is called Google Assistant, and it's called Google Assistant for a reason. They don't just intend to provide an answer; they intend to provide a solution for you in the future, and that solution could take multiple steps in the future. So Eric briefly talked about last week about paid models or potential paid models in the future. I'm not convinced that Google are going to introduce a paid model for that initial direct answer. I think the paid model may come in as the second step. So as Google actually provides the answer, if someone says, can you tell me the best wine from this region? The answer is these are the best 3 wines based upon this blog article. And Google will say, oh, by the way, I found this box of 6 at Tesco, which costs this amount. Would you like me to order them for you? I think that's probably where the revenue model may come in. If you have paid results immediately, I can see that putting people off these types of services. So they have to be very careful about providing exactly what the user is looking for to begin with.
Yeah, I think Dora mentioned if you put paid answers straight away, you look like you're biased, which is, I think, a fair point. That was a really great answer, or a great addition to what was said last time. Thanks a lot, David. UST, I'll remember that one. And the other thing that I take away from that is I'm being outvoted. It's assistive engine optimization and not answer engine optimization. Perhaps Kim can support me that it might be answer and not assistive, and if not, I might have to give up.
I have an example from real life for probably more what Dawn was talking about and a little bit of what Eric is talking about. And that is assistive technology when you're traveling. And when you do a search for, okay, show me the best restaurant near me, that works if you're sitting at home or you're looking for something local. What happens when you're traveling and you're driving and you're going and you're not in a big rush from point A to point B? This actually literally happened to my husband and I. We were coming back from Ohio and heading back into Pennsylvania, and we were going through the mountains of Pennsylvania, and we were really getting, especially me, fascinated about what do people do here? What's here? And I could not find an app to tell me what was happening as we were driving through. And National Geographic actually had something that was close that could answer some questions, and it was, but I thought to myself, it was missing maps, directions, local, recommendations, things like that. It was looking at it from the bigger National Geographic perspective. So I think assistive is assistive where you are, and we are not stationary. We are moving people, and we have different needs. So I think we have a long way to go in a lot of ways to optimize.
Super good. Thanks a lot. That was you've got the great, perfect little examples that bring points home incredibly well. Now, Rebecca, last one on this, and then we're pretty much through. Have you got anything to add to this position zero discussion?
So if you want to know about answer engine versus assistive engine optimization, I'd say why can't it be both? But in terms of what Eric said in the last episode about Google building an algorithm on top of an algorithm, I think no one really knows what it is that Google is doing for sure. But it sounds like what he's saying is that it's focusing part of its algorithm on specifically looking at the top 10 results that already rank in search, and then extracting the best answer from among those. And that sounds like what you've been saying about the pillars and Google working to understand the available answers first before ranking the best answers. So Google works to understand what's at its disposal and then choose the best answer to rank. I also found a very interesting study that Larry Kim of WordStream did, and it was published on Moz, which might provide insight into how Google picks that best answer from the top 10. He found that pages with high engagement metrics like click-through rate and dwell time were more likely to get the position 0 featured snippet, even if they ranked as low as position 10. So Google's trying to look for signals that say this is the correct answer, this is the answer that's satisfying people searches. But how can they do that? They're not psychic, we think. So they look for these metrics like click-through rate and dwell time that says people clicked through onto this, they were satisfied, they stayed on the page for a long time. And I think that's interesting, as it potentially provides an insight into how Google interprets the best answer from those top 10 to put in position 0.
Okay, brilliant, wonderful. That was great stuff, and thanks for the support. One thing that did strike me, you mentioned their dwell time and how much the users are engaged in the content. I think that's a very big signal for Google. We have been talking a lot about Pogo Sticking. In fact, I would just like to add something of my own, which is that I don't truly think Pogo Sticking is that interesting. What is interesting is whether somebody continues to search for the same thing after visiting your site. So it's less do they go away and then go back to somebody else's site. It's more do they go away and then search something completely different, i.e. they have found the solution, which is what Google's aiming to get from them. That was just my extra little addition. I've added this final thought because I came across it while preparing for a webinar that I'm going to be giving at Digital Olympus, which is online as well, a webinar on Thursday. I found this guy, Ivan Bercovich, who I didn't know, who was at Graphic before, which has been bought by Alexa. And he is talking about authority, precision, and adaptability. That for him is the future of SEO. I really like that trio of words. I think it ends the episode really very nicely. I'd like to thank all three of you for coming along. I thought they were wonderful answers to perhaps not tricky questions, but definitely questions that aren't easy to answer in a simple and helpful manner. And you've done a brilliant job. We've got a little bit of time for questions. If I look at the clock, we've got 5 minutes perhaps. I know David needs to rush off right at the end, which is fine. If he disappears, please don't worry. He's got another meeting straight after. First question, we're looking for, Son Cox actually said to Kim that it was a great example about the Lexis key fob. This question of detail, I'd like to, can you say a little bit more about that? Because we're looking at Google needing to be able to find the actual model, the exact model, which is incredibly difficult for Google, obviously.
Right, it was the model and how to install it, and what business near us had that part and that model. I mean, we lost the keys to the motorhome. What a disaster that was, you know, and we had to replace, or my husband, I got to watch the whole steering column. But it was a matter of finding the manufacturers and the models and the how-to and all that. And Google was kind of helpful, but YouTube rocked it. And
YouTube belongs to Google, by the way.
Right. But people forget that Google or YouTube is a search engine. Greg Jarboe gave a talk at a conference one time, and he really drilled that in. I was like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. Optimized for YouTube. And but they, you know, the guy who did he filmed every single step to a really complicated process. But we were also able to find where to find the part locally, and that was Google. Somebody had to optimize that part numbers.
No, yeah, sorry, I was teasing her. It was a bit rotten of me, and I do apologize. But in fact, it brings up a really interesting point, which is YouTube showed you the solution to your problem, and then Google told you where you could buy the part that you needed to enable you to implement what YouTube would show you, which shows how closely Google is now beginning to get these multiple channels to get people to the solution to their problem. Next question, really quickly, Monroe Systems. We're going to ask David because we know that it's his last moment here. Somebody was asking that they're doing more. They feel they're doing more than their competitors to rank. They're doing more than Amazon. They've got a better service than Amazon, but the others are still outperforming us. Have you got any thoughts that might help Monroe Systems?
There are lots of reasons, I guess, why they may not be ranking quite as well. I think probably the quickest answer would be to niche down and really focus in on uncertain areas to try and be the #1 for. Obviously, Amazon are highly authoritative, and even Google are struggling to compete against them in certain areas themselves. So that's a massive big group to be competing against. But define, ultra closely, precisely where you want your core competency is, and I guess just focus in on that. Maybe produce the most outstanding piece of content possible involving different influencers, and get a real rush of links and social mentions and citations about your brand to that piece of content, hopefully in relation to your very unique thing that you're focusing in on. It's not an easy fix, but I would say that kind of Rome wasn't conquered all at once, and everything just happens in little bit by little bits, and so choose a chunk initially.
Yeah, brilliant. So the answer to competing with the big companies is to find your niche, and really make sure that Google understands that you're best in that niche. SEO Joe Blogs last time, or last time it was, was talking about, we have an opportunity here as well, is that these big beasts are they're less agile, and as smaller companies, we can be more agile, implement things like structured data before they get the chance.
Just one other thing in relation to that, Jason. Yeah. I was doing a voice search earlier on today. I'll see if I can replicate it quickly just now. Okay, Google, what is the best podcasting microphone?
Here is information from Adorama.
Now, there we go. So Google said, here is information from Adorama. If you can see on my camera there, Google knows exactly what the answer is, but it's not going to read it out. It's not going to read it out because there are different affiliate links in there, and it gets into murky waters in terms of revenue share and things like that. And also, interestingly, it only said the Adorama brand name, not adorama.com. So that's a long way of me saying, be very careful with your existing business model, and consider how it may be impacted by answer engine optimization in the future. And you need to be thinking of how you can continue that journey for that customer, because certain experiences in answer engine optimization may not be as good as you initially intended.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. I love that. That idea that you've got to be careful about where your business model is going and how this is going to affect it is a fundamental shift. I have a client who's in a situation where he's saying, if I give Google all this information, I'll lose my business model. And he's saying, well, you've got 5 or 6 years ahead of you, or whatever it is, to develop a new business model, because your old business model is going to die, because you're basically providing information on your market that Google can actually go and get itself. Absolutely wonderful. Now, Rebecca, question for you. William Rock was asking once again about what Kim was saying. Google Assistant's coming close to assisting opportunities wherever you're traveling, based on the GPS of where you are. How close do you think it is getting? Because Kim was saying she was a little bit disappointed and preferred National Geographic.
Well, I haven't tested in sort of the wilds of the mountains or wherever, but I did do a test about localized voice search for my series on voice search, and I did a search for a Sainsbury's near me, and Google responded with very specific directions to the nearest Sainsbury's. When I compared this to Bing and Cortana, there was no comparison. So I'd say that that William is right. Google is definitely closing in on doing this, which I don't know if we should be frightened about or pleased about, but certainly when it comes to looking for stuff that's in your immediate vicinity, it's very helpful, because they have that maps integration, they have your data, your location data, they can put all of the knowledge that they have together across their many products to give you a highly customized, specific answer. What's around you, here's how we can help, here's walking directions or opening hours or whatever it is that you're looking for.
Yeah, super, absolutely perfect. And you mentioned Google Maps, and I, for the webinar I'm doing on Thursday, I actually found, in fact it's Ivan, I can't remember, it's Bercovich, who was saying Google Maps is a perfect example of a knowledge graph, fully functioning knowledge graph in real time with real data coming in. I'm going to present his quote on the webinar on Thursday. Absolutely brilliant example. And the idea as well that Google has this immense advantage because of my business and because of the maps, because it started investing 12 years ago in this stuff, and all of a sudden it's paying off, whereas the others didn't. Brilliant stuff, wonderful. Now David's had to go. I'll just now take a couple of minutes to say thank you, Rebecca. That was absolutely genius. I was going to say genial. I was going to say it in French. Absolutely
Thanks.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
And Kim as well, thank you for stepping at the last minute. You came up with some points that really hit home with the audience. We got questions about those. Thank you. And David, I'll say thank you because he may well watch this again later to check if he was good looking enough today, which he was. Last thing to say, episode 4 is Tuesday at the same time, same place, and it's more than you thought you needed to know about schema markup. If you're not very technical, don't be frightened. I know enough to do good, simple markup without errors. These people are going to push it forwards and give us some really good insights into how you can leverage schema markup to really make a difference to your business in AEO. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, David.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Anton, too. See you soon. See you next week on Tuesday, same time, same place.